He arrived at the institution on a quiet morning when the sun was still low and the grounds were almost empty. The air felt cool, and a soft breeze carried the smell of old trees and polished floors from inside the building. He walked slowly, carrying only a small bag on his shoulder and a worn music notebook in his hand. The notebook had been with him since he was very young, filled with sketches of melodies, little phrases, and ideas that came to him at moments he never expected. To him, this place felt like another world. Everything looked bigger, brighter, and much stricter than any school he had ever known. He paused near the tall doors of the main hall, trying to calm the fluttering nervousness inside him. He knew he had worked hard to be here, but still, he wondered if he would truly belong among people who had been studying music with private tutors, expensive instruments, and long histories of formal training. He had none of that. All he had was the old upright piano at home, the one with chipped keys, and his mother's belief that talent could come from anywhere. Inside, the building felt even more serious. The hallways were wide and filled with framed photos of former students who had become great performers. Their faces showed confidence, success, and pride. He stared at them for a moment and wondered if he would ever be good enough to earn a place among those faces. He shook the thought away, trying not to let fear take over Dot as he moved forward. A few students passed by him. They looked polished, dressed in expensive clothes, holding leather cases and shining instruments. Some glanced at him with curiosity, maybe wondering if he was lost, or maybe trying to understand who this quiet newcomer was. He kept his steps steady, refusing to show how nervous he felt. He reached the office door where he was supposed to check in. A large sign read, "Administration." He took a slow breath and pushed the door open. The first thing he saw was the principal standing near a desk, speaking to someone on the phone. The principal was an older man, with silver hair neatly combed back, a sharp suit, and an expression that carried a strange mix of pride and impatience. He noticed the door open and ended his call quickly. "So you must be the new student," the principal said, his voice calm, but with a hint of doubt. He looked the boy up and down, his eyes landing on the worn notebook and then on the simple clothes he wore. "We don't often get transfers mid-year. What's your name?" He spoke quietly, explaining who he was and why he had come. He mentioned the scholarship letter, the entrance evaluation he completed, and how grateful he was for the opportunity. But the principal didn't look impressed. Instead, he raised an eyebrow and said, "We'll see if you can keep up. This institution demands discipline and perfection. Many think they can handle it, but few actually can." The boy nodded, though inside, the words stung a little. He thought the principal would welcome him warmly, or at least give him the chance to prove himself before judging him. Still, he stayed calm. He had learned long ago that sometimes the best way to answer doubt was through patience. The principal handed him a small folder with his schedule and pointed toward a hallway without offering further help. "Your first class is in room 4B. Try not to be late. And remember, we expect excellence here." The boy thanked him softly and stepped out of the office. As he walked down the hall, he tried to ignore the uneasy feeling that the principal had already made up his mind about him. He hoped that once people heard him play, things would change. Room 4B was a medium-sized room with a grand piano in the corner and a group of students already sitting in rows. They were talking among themselves until he entered. The conversations faded slightly as they turned to look at him. Some gave polite smiles, others simply stared, trying to figure out who he was. The instructor, a younger woman with a warm face, greeted him politely and asked him to take a seat. She introduced him briefly to the class, but the moment passed quickly as she began the lesson. Throughout the class, the boy stayed quiet, taking notes carefully. He didn't want to draw any attention to himself just yet. When the class ended, most students rushed out, eager to get to their next activity. One of them, a tall boy with neatly combed hair, stayed behind for a moment. He approached the newcomer with a curious smile and asked, "So, you play piano, right?" The boy nodded. "What level are you at?" The student asked casually, though his tone carried a slight challenge. The newcomer hesitated. "I'm not sure what level. I just play." The student laughed a little. "Everyone has a level here. You'll need one if you want to get anywhere." Then he picked up his bag and walked off, leaving the boy wondering once again if he truly fit in. The rest of the day passed quietly. He explored the building, found the cafeteria, and walked around the practice rooms where other students played violins, cellos, and pianos with confident precision. Each note sounded like it was coming from someone who had been trained by professionals since childhood. Listening to them made him both nervous and inspired. By late afternoon, he found an empty practice room with an upright piano sitting quietly against the wall. He stepped inside, closed the door gently behind him, and sat at the bench. The room felt peaceful, almost like a small world created just for him. He placed his hands on the keys and let out a slow breath. This was the only place where he didn't feel judged or out of place. Music had always been his way of showing the world who he was. Without thinking too hard, he pressed the first key. A soft note echoed in the room, then another, and then he began to play. The music flowed out of him like water from a quiet stream, smooth, natural, unforced. He played a piece he had been working on at home, one filled with emotion, the kind that didn't need fancy words to explain. His fingers moved across the keys with ease, touching the high notes lightly and pressing the deeper notes with strength. For a moment, he forgot he was in a new place. He forgot the looks from other students and the sharp tone of the principal. All that mattered was the music. After a few minutes, he sensed someone standing near the door. He turned his head slightly and saw the principal, arms crossed, watching him through the small glass window. His playing stopped instantly, his hands freezing above the keys. The principal opened the door and stepped inside slowly. "I thought I heard someone playing," he said, his voice unreadable. He stood near the piano, listening to the last faint vibration of the final note. The boy waited silently, worried he had done something wrong. The principal let out a faint breath, almost like a disappointed sigh. "You've got enthusiasm," he said, choosing his words carefully. "But this isn't the place for casual playing. You'll need structure, discipline, and control. This isn't a hobby. It's a craft." The words felt sharp, even though they weren't spoken loudly. The boy felt his chest tighten a little. He had hoped the principal would hear something promising in his music, something worth encouraging. Instead, it felt like another wall was being built in front of him. "Stick to the assigned pieces for now," the principal added before turning away. "We don't want you forming bad habits." The principal walked out, leaving the boy sitting alone at the piano once again. For a moment, he didn't move. His hands rested quietly on his lap as he stared at the keys. He felt a mix of embarrassment and frustration, but he refused to let those feelings take over. After gathering himself, he placed his hands back on the keys. The room was still. He closed his eyes and played again, softer this time, letting each note rise and fall gently. He played not to prove anything, but simply because this was the one thing that made him feel grounded. The sunlight outside began to fade, turning the room a soft shade of orange. Students in the hallway walked by, unaware of the quiet determination growing inside him. He played until the light dimmed completely, and he could no longer see the keys clearly. When he finally stood up to leave, he felt different. The first day had been hard. The principal's attitude had been sharper than expected, and the atmosphere of the institution felt heavy. But he also felt something he couldn't fully describe, something like a small fire. Inside him, He knew he didn't come from a place of privilege. He didn't have the perfect background or the perfect instrument. But he had music inside him, something no one could take away. As he walked down the hallway, he whispered to himself a quiet promise. He would not let anyone decide his worth before hearing what he was truly capable of. His journey at this institution was only beginning. And even though the first day had tested him, he was ready to face whatever came next. The next morning arrived with a quiet chill, and he woke earlier than most students. The sky outside his window was still dim, and the halls were silent. He dressed slowly, letting his mind settle before the day began. The memory of the principal standing at the practice room door still sat in his chest like a small weight. He knew he shouldn't let it bother him so much, but he had hoped for at least a small sign of encouragement. Instead, he got doubt. But he told himself that every beginning was different, and sometimes the hardest ones led to the biggest changes. He reached the cafeteria before most students arrived. The room smelled of warm bread and fresh tea. He picked a simple breakfast and sat at a small table near the corner. For a while, he ate quietly, watching the room fill slowly with groups of students chatting and laughing. They seemed so comfortable with each other, as if they had known one another for years. He wondered if he would ever feel that way here. A few students glanced at him from other tables, not unkindly, just curiously. Some whispered, maybe trying to guess who he was or where he came from. He tried not to let it distract him. He finished eating and left before the room got crowded. His first class of the day was music theory. He walked in and sat down early, taking out his notebook. Students entered in pairs and groups, filling the room. The tall boy from yesterday noticed him and gave a faint nod before turning back to his friends. At least it wasn't a hostile gesture. He took it as a small step forward. The instructor came in and began the lesson. The boy listened carefully, writing down notes quickly. Theory never came easily to him, but he always made an effort to understand it. The teacher asked a few questions to the class, and students raised their hands confidently. He didn't raise his. Not yet. Halfway through the class, the instructor suddenly paused and said, "Let me hear a simple progression from someone. Who would like to try?" Several hands shot up. The teacher scanned the room, then his eyes landed on the new boy. "You?" the instructor said gently. "Would you like to try?" The boy felt a rush of nervous heat spread through his cheeks. He didn't want to stand out this early, but he also didn't want to seem afraid. He stood up slowly, walked to the piano at the front of the classroom, and sat down. The instructor asked for a basic chord progression, something simple. He placed his hands on the keys, took a silent breath, and played. The chords came out steady and clean, even though his heart was beating fast. He finished the sequence and looked up. A few students nodded, impressed. Others whispered to one another. The teacher smiled kindly and said, "Good, very good." It wasn't a big performance, but it was enough to ease some of the tension inside him. For the first time since arriving, he felt like he had done something right. After class, he packed his things and stepped into the hallway. A student approached him, a girl with a soft voice and a friendly smile. "Hey, that was nice," she said. "You play smoothly." He thanked her. The moment felt small yet meaningful. It was the first genuine kindness he had received since stepping foot in the institution. The day continued with other classes, and, though he still felt out of place at times, the feeling wasn't as heavy as yesterday. He was starting to understand the rhythm of the school, the tone of the teachers, and the attitude of the students. He moved through the halls quietly, keeping to himself, but slowly observing everything. In the afternoon, there was a short break. Students filled the courtyard, talking in groups or practicing small melodies on portable instruments. He found an empty bench near the edge of the space and sat down, watching the activity around him. a group of students approached the nearby fountain, laughing loudly. Among them was the tall boy who had questioned him yesterday. They were talking about the upcoming annual performance, something everyone seemed excited about. Only the best get chosen. One of them said, "No way the new kid is getting in," another replied. The boy overheard the comment, though he tried not to react. He kept his eyes on the courtyard, pretending he didn't hear. But deep down, the words struck something inside him. It wasn't anger. It was something quieter, something like determination, slowly forming. When break ended, he headed toward the practice hallway. Even though he had regular classes, he couldn't stop himself from playing whenever he found a moment. The hallway was filled with closed doors and faint sounds of instruments coming from inside different rooms. He found an empty one at the end and walked in. This room had a grand piano instead of an upright. The glossy surface reflected the light from the small window, and the keys looked almost untouched. He sat down slowly, letting his fingers rest on the smooth surface. He pressed a single key. A rich sound filled the room. He closed his eyes. He played softly at first, letting his hands warm up. Then he shifted into something more emotional, one of the pieces he had created on his own. It wasn't written down anywhere. It lived only in his mind and in the patterns his fingers remembered. The melody carried a mix of hope, sadness, and something gentle and deep. As he played, the outside world seemed to fade away. Every worry, every doubt, every comment from other students dissolved into the music. He didn't think about perfection or technique. He only thought about expression, about telling a story through sound. He didn't realize someone was listening. A faint knock on the door startled him, and he stopped playing instantly. For a moment, silence filled the room. Then the door opened slightly. The instructor from earlier peeked inside. "I didn't mean to interrupt," he said softly. "I was walking by and heard you playing." The boy felt tense, not sure what the teacher would say. "That was beautiful," the instructor continued. "Where did you learn to play like that?" He hesitated. "I just taught myself at home." The instructor stepped inside fully, closing the door behind him. He walked toward the piano slowly, listening to the last fading echo of the notes. "There is something special in the way you play," he said. "Not many students can bring emotion into a room so naturally. Technique can be taught, but feeling? That's much harder to find." The boy didn't know how to respond. He felt a small wave of relief, appreciation, and surprise. After the discouragement from the principal yesterday, hearing something positive from a teacher felt almost unreal. "Have you thought about signing up for the performance selection?" the instructor asked. The boy looked down at the keys. "I'm not sure I'm ready." The instructor shook his head gently. "No one ever feels ready. That's the truth. But sometimes, moments like these, when your talent speaks without fear, are the ones you need to trust." He thanked the instructor quietly. "Keep practicing," the teacher said with a smile before leaving the room. When the door closed, the boy sat for a long moment, thinking about the conversation. His hands hovered above the keys, unsure whether to continue or rest. He felt something shifting inside him, a new sense of possibility. If a teacher believed in his playing, maybe he wasn't as out of place here as he feared. Later in the day, the principal made an announcement through the speakers. His voice echoed through every hallway and room. "Students, the annual performance auditions will begin next week. Only those who maintain discipline and demonstrate excellence should consider applying. We do not lower our standards for anyone." The last sentence felt pointed, almost as if it were aimed at someone specific. The boy knew exactly who, but instead of feeling crushed, something inside him strengthened. He had been doubted before. He had been underestimated more times than he could count. But music wasn't something he used to impress people. It was something he used to breathe, something that helped him make sense of the world. As the day came, To an end, he returned once more to the quiet practice room. He didn't play loudly this time. He played softly, thoughtfully, feeling each note like a step on a path. He wasn't afraid to walk anymore. He didn't know what the next days would bring. He didn't know whether he would make it into the performance or what the principal would think. But for the first time since arriving, he felt something real, a sense that his talent, quiet as it was, had a place here. When he finally left the practice room, the halls were empty and the building felt peaceful. He walked slowly, feeling lighter than the day before. He didn't need approval. He didn't need perfect conditions. All he needed was a chance, and he was ready to take it. He woke up on the third morning with a different kind of feeling inside him. It wasn't confidence exactly, but it wasn't fear either. It was something steady, like a quiet push telling him he was getting closer to something important. The sunlight outside was brighter than the past 2 days, and for a moment he stood by the window, staring at the way the light touched the edges of the buildings. The institution looked peaceful from there, almost gentle, though he knew it held its own kind of pressure. He got dressed and made his way to the cafeteria again. This time, the room was already busier when he arrived. Students were filling tables, speaking in quick conversations, laughing, sharing notes, talking about auditions, homework, or their plans for the day. He walked quietly to the corner table he had sat at before. It wasn't that he wanted to isolate himself. It was just that he didn't know where he fit yet. But today, something small changed. Instead of the usual glances filled with curiosity or uncertainty, a few students nodded at him. Another offered a small smile. They weren't warm gestures, but they weren't distant either. They were somewhere in between, the kind that suggested people were starting to see him not as a stranger, but as a part of the place. After he finished eating, he headed toward his first class. As he walked through the hallway, he passed a group of students gathered around the bulletin board. A few were talking loudly about the upcoming performance auditions. "I heard only 12 students get picked," one said. "Yeah, and that list is probably already full of the usual names," another replied. A third student added, "Heard the principal is judging this year again. Good luck to anyone he doesn't like." The boy slowed his steps, listening quietly. The principal's judgment still weighed on him, but the teacher's encouraging words from yesterday had given him a kind of shield against the doubt. He kept walking. His first class passed smoothly. The instructor asked him a question again, and this time he answered without hesitation. The teacher seemed pleased. A few students turned to look at him with mild surprise, but they didn't seem bothered by him. If anything, some looked like they were starting to accept that he had a place in the room. During the second class, the girl who had complimented his playing yesterday whispered to him, "You're doing well." Her words were soft, but they mattered more than she probably realized. He gave a quiet thank you at lunch. Something surprising happened. The tall boy from the first day approached him. His expression wasn't unfriendly, but it wasn't overly warm either. It was somewhere in the middle, curious. "You practice a lot, don't you?" The tall boy said, "Yes," the newcomer answered honestly. The tall boy nodded slowly. "That's good. The auditions? They're tough. Most people here have been training for them since last year." He didn't know what the tall boy wanted him to say, so he stayed quiet. After a moment, the tall boy added, "Well, good luck, if you're going for it." And then he walked off. The boy watched him leave. It wasn't exactly encouragement, but it wasn't mockery either. It was progress. After lunch, the boy returned to the practice hallway. Every room was filled with music, fast runs on violins, strong strokes on cellos, confident piano pieces that echoed through the walls. Some students practiced their audition pieces with intense concentration. The air was filled with both excitement and tension. He found the same practice room he had used yesterday and stepped inside. The grand piano gleamed softly under the warm afternoon light. He sat down, closed the door behind him, and rested his hands on the keys. He didn't start with a difficult piece. Instead, he began with something gentle, slow scales, soft chords, light melodies to warm his fingers and clear his mind. Then he shifted into the melody he had played the day before, the one the teacher had praised. This time, he played it with a little more confidence. The notes flowed with more strength, carrying emotion in a way that felt honest and freed out as he played. He remembered the teacher's words. Asterisk technique can be taught, but feeling is rare. Asterisk, he held on to that thought. Not long after, there was a quiet tap at the door. He wondered if the same teacher had returned, but when the door opened, it wasn't the teacher. It was the girl who had spoken kindly to him earlier. "Can I listen?" she asked. He nodded, and she stepped inside carefully, closing the door behind her. She sat in the chair near the wall and watched him with quiet interest. "Play whatever you want," she said. He started again, the melody rising gently into the small room. She listened without interrupting, her expression soft and thoughtful. When he finished, she clapped lightly. "That's really beautiful," she said. "I've never heard someone play like that. It feels like there's a story in it." He smiled faintly. "Thank you." She leaned forward slightly. "You should audition." He looked at her with uncertainty. "You think so?" "I know so," she said simply. "You play with heart. Not everyone does." Her words, like the instructor's, added a new layer of encouragement, and for a moment the room felt brighter. They talked for a few minutes after that. She asked where he learned to play, and he explained how he had taught himself. She seemed amazed. Then she told him about the school, about how it worked, about the principal, and about how some students struggled even if they had been trained for years. "Sometimes talent doesn't come from where people expect," she said gently. After she left, the boy sat quietly at the piano. He felt grateful, not only for her words, but for the kindness behind them. It was rare, but it was enough to strengthen him a little more. That evening, the instructor visited the practice hallway again. He knocked on the boy's door and stepped inside with a gentle smile. "Still practicing," he said. "That's good." The boy nodded. The instructor sat in the chair beside the piano. "I've been thinking about your playing," he said. "You have something special, but you need guidance too. If you're willing, I'd like to help you prepare for the auditions." The boy's eyes widened. "You would?" "Of course," the teacher replied. "But you'll need discipline. Not like the principal's version of discipline, strict and cold. I mean real discipline, patience, practice, understanding the music, not just memorizing it." The boy nodded quickly. "I can do that." The instructor smiled. "Good. Let's start then." For the next hour, the teacher guided him carefully. He corrected finger placements, explained phrasing, and helped him shape the melody with better balance. The boy absorbed every word, hungry to learn. His playing grew more refined, more controlled, but the emotion still remained. When they finished, the instructor said, "You're getting closer every day. Keep going." And then he left with a gentle wave. The boy stayed in the room long after the lesson ended. He replayed everything the teacher had told him, practicing until his fingers felt tired. He didn't force himself past exhaustion. He had learned not to do that. Instead, he played until the music felt steady and natural. When he finally left the practice room, the hallway was nearly empty. He made his way to the front doors of the building, but paused before stepping outside. The evening sky was a deep shade of blue, and the trees outside rustled softly. He stood there for a moment, letting the cool air brush against his face. He didn't know what his future at this institution would look like. He didn't know how the auditions would go, or how the principal would treat him in the coming days. But something inside him had changed. The doubt that had followed him since his first day wasn't gone. But now it was balanced by the encouragement of people who saw something in him. Something worth nurturing. The next few days passed in a rhythm that felt almost comfortable. He woke early, attended classes, practiced during every free moment, and worked with the instructor whenever he had the chance. Students started noticing him more. Some asked him small questions, others nodded when they passed him. The tall boy seemed to soften, no longer questioning him with the same edge as before. But the most surprising thing was this. The principal noticed the shift. The principal never said anything directly to him, but the boy often caught him watching from a distance during class changes, in the cafeteria, or near the practice rooms. The principal's expression was unreadable, as if he couldn't decide what to make of the quiet student who practiced longer than anyone else. One afternoon, the principal approached him in the hallway. His footsteps were firm and deliberate. "You've been practicing a great deal," the principal said. "Yes," the boy replied quietly. "Why?" The question surprised him. He didn't expect the principal to ask something so direct. He took a breath and answered truthfully. "Because I want to get better. Because music is the only way I feel like myself." The principal looked at him for a long moment, as if studying him. Then he nodded slightly, though it didn't seem like agreement. More like acknowledgement. "We'll see how far that takes you," the principal said before walking away. The words weren't friendly, but they weren't dismissive either. They felt like a challenge. That night, the boy returned to the practice room feeling more motivated than ever. He sat down at the piano and played, not because he felt pressured, but because something deep inside him needed to be expressed. His music filled the small room strong, emotional, full of hope and struggle and quiet strength. He didn't know who he would become by the time the auditions arrived. He didn't know if he would succeed or fail. But he knew something important now. He wasn't invisible. People were beginning to see him, and that meant his journey was just starting. The next morning felt heavier than usual for the young pianist. It was as if the sun took its time rising, unsure if it should brighten a world that had felt so unkind to him the day before. He walked toward the music building with slow steps, feeling the weight of the moments that had passed. But even with all the doubts inside him, something in his heart kept pushing him forward. It was a quiet force, steady and warm, telling him not to give up. When he stepped into the hallway, the air felt different. Students who used to walk past him without a second glance were now whispering. Some looked at him with surprise, others with curiosity. A few, for the first time, looked at him with something close to respect. The piano room where everything had happened the day before had become the center of hushed conversations. People had heard about the way he played, how the room fell silent, and how even those who had doubted him were left stunned. He didn't walk any faster when he noticed the stairs, but he didn't walk any slower either. He kept his head straight, breathing quietly as he made his way to the practice room he always used. He hoped no one would follow him, but deep down he already knew things wouldn't be simple anymore. Inside the room, the piano waited for him, looking almost familiar and comforting. He sat down and gently placed his hands on the keys. For a moment, he didn't play. He closed his eyes, letting his breath settle. The world outside the door was loud, but inside here, it was only him and the music. Before his fingers could touch the first note, the door opened. He turned his head slowly, unsure who it might be. A group of 3 students stepped inside. He had seen them around. One was a violinist, one a singer, and another someone who seemed talented at everything, but never focused on just one thing. They didn't look unkind, just nervous. The violinist stepped forward. We saw what happened yesterday." His voice shook slightly, as if he wasn't sure if he should be there. The pianist didn't answer. He didn't know what to say. "We wanted to say it was Incredible, the singer added softly. We didn't know you played like that. Compliments weren't something the pianist was used to. And hearing them now, from people who had never paid him attention before, made him unsure how to feel. He nodded politely, but stayed quiet. We're preparing for the performance next month, the violinist continued, and we were thinking, maybe you might want to join us. It's a group performance, and we could use someone with your skill. He froze. The idea shocked him. Not because he had never been asked before, no one had ever asked him at all, but because he wasn't sure he belonged in something like that. A group performance with students everyone admired? It felt almost impossible. We're serious, the violinist said quickly, noticing the hesitation. We watched you play. You have something rare. The pianist still didn't know how to answer. Part of him wanted to accept. Part of him feared he wasn't ready. And another part wondered if this invitation was genuine, or if they simply wanted him because others had started talking. Think about it, the singer added gently, sensing his uncertainty. You don't have to say yes now. They stepped back and left the room quietly. The pianist stared at the closed door for a long moment, unsure what to make of it. When he finally turned back to the piano, his hands trembled. He began to play softly, letting the music calm his thoughts. The keys felt warm beneath his fingers, and soon the quiet room was filled with a gentle melody that wrapped around him like comfort. Later that day, during lunch, he sat alone under a tree by the courtyard. He preferred this spot quiet, away from crowds, where he could think without anyone watching him. But even there, he noticed a few students looking his way, whispering. He tried to ignore it. Just when he took another bite of his sandwich, a soft voice spoke. May I sit here? He looked up. It was a girl he had seen before in the music hall, always practicing the cello, always quiet. She held her lunchbox in her hands and waited for his answer. He nodded. She sat down gently, leaving enough space so he wouldn't feel crowded. She didn't talk right away, and he appreciated that. He didn't like being forced into conversation. After a while, she finally said, You're playing yesterday. It made me stop walking. I just stood there listening. It felt like the whole building stopped with me. He wasn't sure how to respond. He wasn't used to people speaking kindly to him. People talk too much here, she continued softly. They judge quickly. They whisper. They pretend they know others. It gets tiring. But music, it lets us breathe. Yesterday, your music felt like something real. She looked down at her hands, then added, I liked it. He gave her a small nod, and it was enough. They ate in silence, comfortable enough to share the space without talking. When lunch ended, she stood and gave him a gentle smile. If you ever want someone to practice with, I'm usually in the strings room. She didn't wait for an answer. She simply walked away. That afternoon, when he returned to the practice room, something unexpected happened. The principal was standing nearby. Not to mock him this time, the expression on his face was different. A little tired, a little thoughtful, and maybe even a little unsure. The principal approached him with careful steps, as if he didn't want to scare him away. I spoke to a few instructors, he began slowly. They all mentioned your performance yesterday. It seems you surprised many people, including me. The pianist didn't say a word. I may have been hard on you, the principal continued. His voice wasn't as sharp as usual, harder than needed. I want you to know, I didn't expect what you showed yesterday. It wasn't an apology. Not yet. But it was the closest thing the principal had offered in a long time. There's an upcoming event, the principal added. A special one. Students with notable talent are usually invited. I'm considering placing your name on the list. He paused. If you're interested. The pianist looked at him with surprise he couldn't hide. The principal nodded once. then walked away without waiting for a response. After he left, the pianist stood frozen for a moment. The world felt strange. Doors that had always been closed were beginning to open, and he didn't know if he was ready to walk through them. He sat at the piano again and played. This time, the notes were stronger. Not louder, just more certain. As if for the first time, he believed a small part of what others had been saying. The next few days moved quickly. Students who used to ignore him now asked questions about his music. Some asked for tips. Some simply asked if he wanted to join them for practice. The invitations felt overwhelming at times, but he handled them quietly, never letting the attention change who he was. One evening, as the sun set behind the building, the violinist and singer from before approached him again. "Have you decided?" the violinist asked. He didn't answer right away. He looked at their faces carefully. They didn't seem fake. They didn't look like they were using him. They looked like people who truly wanted to create something meaningful. Finally, he gave a small nod. Their faces lit up instantly. "Great," the violinist said with excitement he couldn't hide. "We're going to make something amazing." The pianist wasn't sure yet what the future held, but for the first time, he felt like he wasn't standing alone. Something inside him shifted gently, like the beginning of a new chapter. And even though he still didn't completely trust the sudden kindness around him, he was willing to try. The music inside him felt ready to grow, and the world, slowly, was beginning to listen. The days that followed brought a quiet change the young pianist could feel deep in his chest. He still arrived early every morning, still slipped into the practice room before most students even finished their breakfast, and still let the music guide his hands. But now, each time he entered the room, there was something new waiting for him, an unfamiliar sense of being seen. People who had once rushed past him in the halls now slowed their steps, offering a small nod or a simple greeting. Some even paused by the practice room door just to listen for a moment. It was strange, and he wasn't yet sure how to react, but he didn't let it shake him. He focused on the one thing that had always stayed steady through every moment of doubt: the piano, the new group he had joined. The violinist, the singer, and the all-rounded student had asked him to meet them for their first full practice. He walked into the rehearsal room, feeling his heartbeat loud in his ears. He didn't know what to expect. He wasn't someone who spoke much, and working in a group meant talking, sharing ideas, discussing parts. All the things he wasn't used to. But the moment he walked inside, the 3 students greeted him with warm, genuine smiles. "Glad you made it," the violinist said. Setting his bow to the side, the pianist nodded quietly. Feeling the warmth of the room settle into his shoulders, they started slowly. The violinist played the first line, soft and smooth. The singer hummed gently, letting her voice float around the notes. And when it was his turn, he breathed in, placed his hands carefully on the keys, and let his fingers speak for him. The room changed instantly. The music they created together didn't feel forced. It blended without effort, as if their sounds had been waiting for each other. He didn't need to talk much. His part fit naturally. When they finished the first run, the room fell quiet. Then the all-rounded student let out a breath. "This is going to be something special," he said with a wide smile. The pianist's chest warmed a little. He didn't usually think of himself as part of something special, but hearing those words made a soft hope grow inside him. They practiced for nearly 2 hours. Sometimes they stopped to adjust a part. Sometimes they started over. Sometimes they laughed when a note slipped or the tempo didn't match. It was the first time he felt music not as something he carried alone, but something he could share. When practice ended, the others packed up their things, but none of them rushed away. They stood around him, chatting lightly, asking if he had ideas for the arrangement. He didn't know how to answer right away, but the violinist reached out gently. "Your opinion matters," he said with sincerity. "We want to hear your thoughts." It felt strange being asked for ideas, not ignored. He pointed at a measure in the sheet and tapped lightly on the paper. The violinist nodded. "We can try that next time." Good call. Good call. No one had said anything like that to him before. That evening, he walked home with tired arms, but a full heart. The sky was turning purple, the wind soft against his face. For the first time, he felt like he belonged somewhere. The next few days were full of preparation. The upcoming event was getting closer, and the principal seemed busier than ever. Posters went up around the halls. Students whispered about who would be performing. There were rumors of special guests and talk of scholarship judges attending. The pianist tried not to let the pressure get to him, but it was difficult. He practiced alone whenever he could. Each time he played, he tried to imagine the crowd, the bright lights, the feeling of standing in front of so many people. His hands trembled at the thought. He wasn't afraid of music, but he was afraid of people watching him. One afternoon, he walked into the strings room to find the cello student he had met earlier. She sat in her usual place, her eyes closed as she drew her bow gently across the strings. When she opened her eyes and saw him, she smiled. "You're improving," she said without hesitation. He frowned softly. "How do you know?" "I can hear it," she replied. "Your playing feels different, more open." He didn't know if that was true, but hearing it made his chest feel lighter. He sat down on a chair nearby. She continued playing, filling the room with low, rich tones. When she finished, she looked at him again. "Are you nervous about the event?" she asked. He looked at the floor and nodded slowly. "You'll be fine," she said. "Music will take care of you. It always does." Her voice was calm, steady. It felt like a small anchor in the storm inside his mind. As the event approached, the practice sessions with his group grew more intense. They tried new arrangements, adjusted transitions, and sometimes repeated a single part so many times that their fingers ached. But even in the frustration, there was a strange kind of joy. One day, after a particularly long session, they all collapsed on the floor, laughing at how exhausted they were. "We sound better each day," the singer said, lying flat on her back. "We're going to surprise everyone," the all-rounded student added with confidence. They all looked at the pianist then, as if waiting for him to believe it too. He gave a small smile, and that was enough. On the morning of the event, the building buzzed with excitement. Students hurried around carrying instruments, outfits, and sheet music. Teachers checked lists and made notes. The principal walked with quick steps, adjusting his tie over and over as if it wouldn't sit right. When the pianist arrived, the principal spotted him from across the hallway and approached him. "You're ready," the principal said. Though his tone held more hope than certainty. The pianist swallowed hard and nodded. Backstage was loud students tuning instruments, performers warming up voices, shoes tapping nervously against the floor. His group found a corner and gathered around. "Whatever happens out there," the violinist said, "remember we're doing this together." The singer placed a hand on the pianist's shoulder. "Just breathe. The moment the music starts, everything else will disappear." He nodded again. Though his heart beat so fast, he wasn't sure he could breathe at all. When their turn finally came, the announcer called their names. The world seemed to stop for a moment. His feet felt heavy as he walked toward the stage, the lights bright enough to blur his vision. The audience looked like a sea of shadows. He could faintly see the principal sitting in the front row, watching with a mixture of tension and expectation. He sat at the piano. The violinist lifted his instrument. The singer took a calm breath. For a moment, the pianist felt like running. Then he placed his hands on the keys. The first note came out soft, trembling slightly. But the second note was stronger, and the third flowed naturally, as if his body finally remembered he wasn't alone. The violin joined, weaving a gentle thread around the piano. The singer's voice rose above them, warm and clear. Together, their sound filled the room. Halfway through the piece, something shifted inside him. The fear melted. The music grew. He no longer saw the crowd. He didn't hear the whispers. He didn't feel the weight of expectations. He felt only the music. And for the first time in his life, he felt free. When they finished, the final notes lingered in the air. There was a heartbeat of silence. Then the applause began soft at first, and growing louder, stronger, until the entire room clapped in unison. The pianist lifted his head slowly. He saw students standing, teachers smiling, the principal rising from his seat with wide eyes. The group bowed, but the pianist stayed still for a moment longer, letting the sound wash over him. It didn't feel like praise, it felt like acceptance. When they walked off stage, the violinist clapped him gently on the back. "You were incredible," he said with genuine pride. The singer smiled warmly. "I told you music would take care of you." The pianist didn't say anything, but his quiet smile spoke enough. Later, as they stepped away from the crowd, the principal approached him. His expression held something unfamiliar, something gentle. "You changed the entire room," the principal said softly. "I underestimated you." For a moment, the pianist didn't know what to say. But then he gave a small nod, not out of habit, but because he finally believed he deserved to be seen. In the world, at last, was seeing him. He woke up early on the morning of the big event, long before anyone else in the building had even thought about opening their eyes. For a moment, he lay still in the small dorm room the institution had offered him, staring at the ceiling while the soft light of dawn pushed through the window. His mind felt heavy, not with fear, but with a strange calm he couldn't quite explain. It was the kind of calm that came only when someone had given everything they could, and the rest was no longer in their hands. He sat up slowly, rubbing his eyes, then placed both feet on the cold floor. The room around him was simple. A bed, a desk, a chair, and a small shelf where he kept his music sheets. Most of those sheets were old and worn out, borrowed or found. Some he had written himself when inspiration struck, usually late at night when the world grew quiet and the only sound he heard was the echo of his own memories. He stood and walked to the window. The sky was slowly turning gold, the sun waking up in the same quiet way he had. He took a deep breath, and as he let it out, the last pieces of doubt inside him slipped away. The world outside the window looked peaceful, even gentle, but he knew that, by the end of the day, everything would feel different. Today was the event that everyone at the institution had been talking about for weeks. The day when the students would perform in front of guests, teachers, and board members, people who hadn't seen his journey, people who didn't know what he had been through. But they would hear him, and that, he believed, would be enough. He washed his face, changed his clothes, and quietly left the room. The hallways were empty and quiet, filled with the familiar smell of old wooden floors and cleaning soap. As he walked toward the practice room, his footsteps echoed gently, like soft taps on a drum. When he reached the room, he stopped in front of the door. He placed his hand on the handle and took a deep breath. Then he pushed it open. The piano waited for him in the center of the room, its black surface shining faintly in the early morning light. He felt a small smile tug at the corners of his mouth. This piano had become more than an instrument to him. It was the place where he spoke the clearest, where his thoughts made sense, where his emotions found shape. He sat down on the bench and rested his hands on the keys without pressing them. A soft warmth spread through him as if the piano recognized him, remembered him. After a few seconds, he closed his eyes and began to play. The notes came out in a soft stream, gentle at first, like the first drops of rain before a storm. Then they began to grow stronger, deeper, more certain. He played without thinking, trusting his fingers to guide him. Every part of him seemed to join the music. His breath, his heartbeat, even the thoughts he didn't know how to speak. By the time he finished, the sunlight had brightened the entire room. He opened his eyes slowly and looked around. The air felt different, as if it too had listened. He stood up and stretched his hands, then left the room. It was time to get ready. The rest of the building was now awake. Students hurried through hallways with nervous faces, carrying folders and instruments. Teachers walked around giving last-minute instructions. Some students whispered words of comfort to each other, while others paced back and forth, too anxious to talk. When he entered the main hall, a few people stopped and stared at him. They had heard the stories about him, the boy who had been mocked, the boy whose talent had surprised even the people who tried to hold him back. Some students smiled at him, others nodded politely. He responded quietly, keeping his calm. He walked to a quiet corner and sat down for a moment. He closed his eyes again, not to sleep, but to steady himself. He remembered the first day he walked into this building, confused and hopeful. He remembered the moment the principal had mocked him, the strange mix of embarrassment and determination that had filled him. He remembered the long nights of practice, the early mornings, the moments when he doubted himself, and the moments when he felt strong again. Not all those memories felt like pieces of a long road that had led him to this day. When he finally opened his eyes, he saw someone approaching, the same principal who once doubted him, the same person whose words had almost pushed him away. The principal stopped a few steps away from him and cleared his throat. "You should get ready to take your place on stage soon," the principal said. But his voice was different now, quieter, almost respectful. The young pianist nodded once. "I'm ready." The principal looked at him for a moment, as if searching for something to say. But instead, he just nodded and turned to walk away. Soon the hall grew louder as more people filled the seats. Guests arrived, teachers took their positions, and the performers lined up backstage. Behind the curtain, the pianist listened to the first few performances. Each performer was good, talented, confident, expressive. The audience clapped warmly after each one. Finally, a stage assistant called his name. He stood up slowly, breathing in deeply. He walked toward the piano on stage, feeling the heat of the lights and hearing the soft murmur of the audience. The room was large, filled with people, yet it felt strangely quiet to him. He sat down at the bench. The piano in front of him was grand, tall, and elegant. He placed his hands on the keys, the same way he had earlier that morning. His heartbeat slowed. His breathing steadied. Then he began to play. The sound that came out was soft at first, like a whisper in a silent room. But soon it grew fuller, stronger, reaching every corner of the hall. Each note carried emotion, the pain he had felt, the hope he fought to keep, the strength he discovered inside himself. People in the audience leaned forward. Some students backstage froze in place. Teachers exchanged surprised glances. Even the principal, seated in the front row, stared with wide eyes. The young pianist played with everything he had. His fingers moved like they were telling a story only he knew completely, but everyone could feel. By the time he reached the final note, the hall had turned completely silent. He lifted his fingers from the keys and looked up. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then the applause began. It started with a single clap, then another, and then the entire hall erupted with sound. People stood, cheering, clapping, some even wiping their eyes. The sound filled the room in a way he had never heard before. He stood up slowly and bowed. His heart felt light, almost weightless. When he stepped off the stage, Several teachers approached him with wide smiles and warm words. Students congratulated him, some telling him how his performance had moved them. He thanked each one quietly, grateful, but still processing everything. Then the principal approached him. This time, the principal didn't look strict or distant. Instead, there was a softness in his expression, something almost like regret. "I was wrong about you," the principal said quietly. "Very wrong. And today, you showed everyone something extraordinary." The young pianist looked at him for a moment. He didn't need an apology, not really. He just needed the chance to prove himself. And he had. "Thank you," he said simply. The principal nodded. "The institution would be honored to support your future. If you ever need anything." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "My door is open." The pianist didn't say much after that, but he felt something shift inside him. The doubt that once filled him had been replaced by a quiet strength. As the event came to an end and people slowly left the hall, he stayed for a moment longer. He walked back onto the empty stage and placed his hand on the piano one more time. He had come a long way. And he knew this was only the beginning. With a small smile, he turned and walked away, ready for whatever came next. The days after the event felt unreal for the young pianist. Every morning he woke up wondering if the applause, the smiles, and the sudden warmth around him had only been a dream. But each time he walked through the school halls, he saw proof it had truly happened. Students who once ignored him now greeted him. Teachers nodded with a sense of respect. Even the principal looked at him differently, no longer with doubt, but with a careful kind of pride. But even with all the sudden attention, the pianist stayed the same. He still walked quietly, still kept his head low, and still slipped away to his favorite practice room whenever he wanted to breathe. He wasn't used to people suddenly caring, and he didn't know how to handle the sudden shift around him. But there was something warm in knowing that his music had spoken for him. One afternoon, a week after the event, the violinist found him, sitting alone in the courtyard, under the same tree he always chose. "Hey," the violinist said with a hopeful smile. "We're practicing again today. Thought maybe you'd join us?" The pianist looked up, hesitating for a moment. He didn't want the group to think he was pulling away, but the past few days had been overwhelming. He had been trying to find a quiet space in his own mind. The violinist seemed to understand, even without words. He sat down beside him. "You know, the event changed a lot for all of us. Not just for you," he said gently. "People started seeing what we could do together. Some teachers even asked if we'd consider performing at other events." The pianist blinked in surprise. He hadn't expected their performance to continue beyond that one night. "I wanted to ask you first," the violinist continued. "Would you want to keep performing with us? Not because of pressure. Only if you truly want to." The pianist looked down at his hands. For so long, music had been something he held close, something that belonged only to him. But when he played with them, it felt different, bigger. It felt like the music had room to breathe. After a quiet moment, he nodded. The violinist grinned wide. "Good. Then after school, let's meet in our usual room." When he walked into the rehearsal room later, the singer and the all-rounded student were already there. All three of them smiled when they saw him. They didn't start with music right away. Instead, they talked something the pianist was still learning to do. They talked about the event, about what they wanted to try next, and about how they could build something even more meaningful together. For the first time in his life, he wasn't just part of a group. He was part of a team. They began practicing again with new energy. This time, the music wasn't built on fear or pressure. It was built on friendship. Each note felt different. Each moment felt lighter. Even when they made mistakes, they laughed instead of worrying. The pianist found himself smiling more than he ever had. As the days went by, word spread that the group was preparing something new. Students whispered about it in the hallways. Teachers asked the principal when the next performance would be. The pianist didn't know what the big reaction was about, but he stayed focused on the music. One afternoon, while he practiced alone before the group arrived, he heard footsteps outside the room. The door opened, and the principal stepped inside. He didn't look strict or cold this time. Instead, he looked thoughtful, almost nervous. "I've been watching you," the principal said carefully. "Not in a strict way. I mean, I've been noticing how much you've grown." The pianist stayed quiet, unsure where the conversation was heading. "What you did on stage, it wasn't just talent. It was heart. I should have recognized that earlier." His voice softened. "I misjudged you? I saw your quietness as weakness. That was wrong of me." The pianist blinked. The principal's tone held something rare regret. "I want to make things right," the principal continued. "So I'm offering you something." He paused and added, "A scholarship recommendation. If you're interested." The pianist's eyes widened in shock. A scholarship, something he had never imagined he could earn. "You don't have to answer now," the principal said gently. "Just know that you've earned it. Truly." When the principal left, the pianist sat in silence. His mind raced with thoughts he had never dared to dream. A scholarship meant opportunity, a future, a path he had never believed could be his dot when the group arrived. They noticed something different in his expression. "What happened?" the singer asked softly. He hesitated, then shared the news in a quiet voice. The room went silent for a moment. Then they all broke into happy exclamations. "You deserve it." The violinist said, "We're proud of you." The singer added. The all-rounded student grinned. "We knew it was coming. You're amazing." The pianist lowered his gaze, but this time not out of shyness. He felt something warm in his chest, a sense of belonging he had never known. Over the next few weeks, they worked hard on their new performance. The pianist grew more confident. The fear that once lived in his hands disappeared. He still spoke little, but he didn't need many words. His teammates understood him through his playing. One day, while practicing a slow, emotional piece, he felt something unexpected rise inside him. It wasn't fear. It wasn't sadness. It was a deep sense of gratitude for the music, for the group, for the second chances life had given him. When they finished, the room stayed quiet. The singer wiped a small tear from her eyes. "That," she whispered, "was beautiful." And for the first time, the pianist felt the truth of her words. The next school event arrived quicker than they expected. This time, they weren't nervous. They walked onto the stage with a calm confidence that came from trust in one another, trust in their music, and trust in the journey they had taken together. As they began their performance, the room filled with a sound that felt like soft light. The pianist played with emotion deeper than words. The violinist blended seamlessly. The singer's voice rose with warmth. The all-rounded students supported them with gentle harmony. The audience didn't just listen. They felt. When the final note faded, the applause came like a wave, steady, strong, and full of heart. But this time, the pianist didn't freeze. He looked up. He saw faces smiling at him. He saw the principal clapping proudly. He saw his teammates beaming, and something inside him settled. For the first time, he felt like he was exactly where he was meant to be. After the performance, as they walked off the stage, the violinist turned to him with a soft grin. "You know," he said, "people will probably always remember the night you stunned the whole school." The singer added with a little laugh, "But they'll remember this night too, not because of shock, but because of heart." The pianist didn't say anything. Instead, he let his quiet smile speak for him. Later, as he packed up his sheet, music, he caught a reflection of himself in the mirror. A young pianist who stood taller than before, who no longer hid behind silence, who no longer feared being seen. He touched the piano gently one last time, and whispered something only the instrument could hear. "Thank you." As he walked out into the evening air, the sky glowy.